They called her queen, but behind closed doors, she was worshipped like a goddess, and obeyed like a mistress. Her name was Seraphina, a woman whose body was royal, but whose desires were far from holy. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe for more forbidden stories history tried to erase. The kind they never teach you in school. The story of Queen Seraphina of Ravenhall. In the winter of 1791, a daughter was born into the fading nobility of southern France, Seraphina de Lorraine. The youngest of 7 daughters, Seraphina was not meant for glory. She was meant to be sold. But from the moment she could walk, she learned how to move, not like a child, but like a woman who knew every gaze in the room would follow her. By the age of 12, whispers followed her in the monastery halls. By 16, men twice her age were offering land and gold to her family for a single dinner. But Seraphina didn't want land. She wanted power, the kind of power not signed into law, but surrendered in sweat and silence. At 19, she was married off to King Albrecht III of Ravenhall, a grey, dying kingdom surrounded by gold-hungry neighbors. Seraphina arrived in a silk carriage with only 3 bags, one of perfumes, one of books, and one of instruments not fit to name. The court expected a quiet queen. A vessel for heirs. They received a woman who would devour the royal family from the inside. Year 1, the Red Bedroom. Within 6 months, King Albrecht stopped attending council. Within a year, his health declined, but not from illness, from obsession. He refused to sleep without Seraphina beside him, and he begged for her touch like a man starved of air. What happened in her chamber was never officially recorded. But servants reported screams, not of pain, but of something stranger. One maid fainted after changing the sheets. One guard quit after just one night posted outside her door. She had the walls painted red, not painted, but dyed in crushed flowers, oils, and according to rumor, blood. The ceiling was mirrored. The floor padded. And every piece of furniture was designed to restrain, not relax. Year 2, the spread. She didn't stop with the king. She began to seduce others. First, his brother, Lord Marius, a war hero with a scar across his mouth. Then the captain of the guard. Then the royal physician. Then, according to one furious confession letter from the bishop, his wife. Seraphina had no boundaries. She didn't seek love. She sought submission. She would whisper secrets into ears during mass. Slide notes beneath armor chests. Leave silk scarves in council rooms. One evening, 5 men dueled in the garden at the same hour, all for her hand. She watched from the tower, sipping honey wine. Year 3, the rituals. By the 3rd year, she had reshaped the court around her. All meetings were postponed if she was unavailable. Royal proclamations were rewritten to suit her tastes. The queen's guards answered only to her. It was said a ritual room lay behind the royal chapel, lit only with red candles and padded in silk. A single word carved above the entrance, obey. One noble left weeping, shirtless, bleeding, and smiling. Another never returned. When questioned, Seraphina said only, some truths are better experienced than told. Year 4, the collapse of a king. King Albrecht stopped speaking in public. He followed Seraphina like a ghost. He signed what she handed him. He slept where she allowed him. His eyes grew hollow, and his once golden hair turned gray. The Archbishop of Ravenhall was the only one to challenge her. He accused her of witchcraft. She invited him to a private dinner. He was never seen again. Year 5, the Mirror Queen. Seraphina no longer attended court, the court came to her. She lined her chambers with mirrors. Her lovers grew younger. Her perfume was rumored to cause hallucinations. A prince entered her room and never came out. His crown was found on her pillow. She wore it for a week, then burned it. Year 6, the disappearance. King Albrecht died, naked, smiling, and marked. Serafina sealed the palace for 7 days. When the doors reopened, she was gone. No blood. No note. Just a room full of roses, and a mirror that kept fogging, as if someone were still breathing in front of it. Subscribe for more royal secrets twisted by power, lust, and legend. Year 7, The Cult of Serafina. 10 years later, a nobleman arrived with a rose in glass and a scroll signed, S. Instructions inside spoke of velvet, silence, and submission under moonlight. A cult formed, the obedient. Their symbol? A red mirror. Their goal? To see her return. Once a year, they gather beneath the Capitol, masked, silent, kneeling before mirrors. Some say, in the final hour, she appears. Year 9, The Resurrection Room. Scholars uncovered a velvet-lined room in the west wing of the palace. On the ceiling, her name scratched over and over, Serafina. At its center, a device. Not a throne. Something made for worship, or something worse. A mirror fogged from the inside. And a phrase written faintly on the glass. She never left. Year 12, The Archive Unlocked. An anonymous trunk arrived at the National Library. Inside, Serafina's records, king's letters, and a tunnel map marked, the vein, leading deep beneath the palace. A historian who went looking for it disappeared. The next day, his office received, a mirror. Fogged. From the inside. Year 13, The Royal Impersonator. At a Meridor gala, a woman in red arrived uninvited. She wore the Ravenhall crest and said, "I am the rightful heir." Guards tried to touch her. They froze. By morning, nobles had fled, vanished, or taken vows of silence. One witness wrote, "She did not speak her name. She entered, and I remembered her." Year 14, The Second Coronation. At dawn, dozens of women in red entered the ruined palace. No guards. No resistance. At noon, a single ancient bell rang. Cameras glitched. Then a voice echoed. "You forgot how to worship. I've come to teach you again." Year 15, The Return. They say her scent lingers. Her reflection appears before her shadow. And her footsteps still echo in the Hall of Whispers. One noble entered the ruins and returned days later, whispering, "There is no death. There is only Serafina." Year 16, The Mirror Rebellion. Disappearances spread, nobles, guards, envoys. All gone without trace. The only clues, red ribbons, fresh roses, or fogged mirrors. On one palace wall, etched in the glass. "She is coming back. Kneel." Part 2, Her Legacy in the Blood. Year 17, The Inheritance. In a quiet corner of the modern Ravenhall archives, a young PhD researcher named Elise Fontaine stumbled upon a collection of unlisted royal records, sealed, unsigned, and oddly warm to the touch. Among them was a hand-drawn family tree. It ended not with Serafina, but with a blank name, connected by a red thread. Elisa's mother had once whispered stories about a great ancestor who vanished in silk. A woman who made kings beg and priests burn their diaries. Now, that story had a name. And Elise had the same eyes. Year 18, The First Awakening. It began with a dream. Elise standing barefoot in the Hall of Whispers, surrounded by mirrors. In each reflection, a different version of herself, crowned, cloaked, bleeding, kneeling. She woke to find a red silk glove at the foot of her bed. Then came the whispers. In lecture halls. In taxis. In stairwells. "You remember me." She wasn't hallucinating. She was hearing Serafina. Or worse, becoming her. Year 19, The Society. She wasn't alone. Other women, professors, lawyers, writers, contacted her after reading her published notes on Serafina. They all had dreams. Red dreams. Some woke covered in rose petals. One said her mirror cracked when she whispered the queen's name. They called themselves the inheritors. They didn't worship Serafina. They embodied her. One woman seduced a billionaire and made him donate his company. Another exposed a cardinal's darkest secret with one handwritten letter. Elise. She was just beginning. Year 20, the return of the Red Room. Elise traced the original tunnel beneath Ravenhall, the vein, to a sealed chamber. When she entered, the candles lit themselves. The room was exactly as described in Serafina's journals. Mirrors. Velvet. Symbols carved into stone. In the center, a seat. A throne. Waiting. Elise sat. And in the mirrors, she saw her, Serafina, smiling, eyes aflame. Welcome back. Year 21, the Blood Mirror. Nobles started dying. Not violently. Not publicly. They simply vanished, leaving behind fogged mirrors. And sometimes, rose petals, still wet. One body was found in the Vatican. Another in a Manhattan penthouse. Always the same markings, a red line across the chest, and the words etched into glass. Obedience is not submission. It is devotion. Governments panicked. The press called it mass hysteria. But the inheritors knew, Serafina's bloodline had awakened. And Elise was not their queen. She was their weapon. Year 22, the Red Heir. In the quiet marble halls of an elite Swiss boarding school, a teenage girl named Clea began drawing symbols in her sleep, mirror shapes, crimson spirals, and the name, Serafina, in looping cursive. She was Elise's daughter. Born in secrecy, raised in silence, Clea had been kept from the inheritors, until now. On her 16th birthday, she touched her mother's mirror and whispered, "Show me." What she saw changed her forever. Year 23, the Fracture. Not all inheritors agreed with Elise. Some believed Serafina's legacy was being corrupted by Elise's hunger for power. A splinter faction, calling themselves the Crimson Discipline, began to rise. They followed a stricter code. Less indulgence, more control. They believed the bloodline should guide the world, not drown it. And they wanted Clea. Year 24, the Tasting Ceremony. At a private island estate, Clea was invited to a gathering of over 100 inheritors. It was her tasting, a rite of passage where each woman offered her a single kiss, whispering her desires into Clea's mind. By dawn, Clea remembered everything. She stood atop the ceremonial mirror and said only, "I am not Elise. I am the echo of the original." From that day forward, the Red Heir had her own followers. Year 25, the Mirror War begins. 2 queens. 1 legacy. The world began to split. Elise, ruling through elegance and dominance. Clea, through mystery and transcendence. Some mirrors began to fog, then crack. Whole cities lost power during inheritor rituals. A senator fainted during a speech and woke repeating only one word, "Obey." The Red Veil was no longer unified. It was preparing for civil war. Year 26 to 29, the Shadow Years. These years became unrecorded. Historians later dubbed them the Shadow Years. Inheritors stopped appearing publicly. But their influence deepened. Laws changed quietly. Billionaires vanished. Worshippers appeared in remote towns, offering roses to strangers. And Clea? She disappeared. The last known photo showed her standing in front of a cracked mirror, smiling. Year 30, the Veil rises. It had been 9 years since Elise took the throne of velvet and mirrors. The world above had changed, but below, the inheritors thrived. They were no longer hiding. They were infiltrating. Boardrooms. Courts. Parliaments. Fashion houses. streaming platforms. The whispers had turned to speeches. Seduction became legislation. Worship took the shape of investment portfolios. In Ravenhall, the old cathedral bells rang again, but not for prayer. For ritual. Elise was no longer Elise. She was her. Not possessed. Transformed. The woman known to the world as Dr. Elise Fontaine had become the living embodiment of Queen Seraphina. Not a copy. Not a voice in the mirror. But her blood. Her flesh. Her will. Now she walked fully in the open, wearing red. And when she passed, men bowed. Women followed. And glass fogged without breath. Every mirror became a doorway. Every screen became a sermon. You gave the world your body, she told them. Now give me your soul. And they did. A new order had formed, the Red Veil. Not a cult. Not a kingdom. A shadow empire built on elegance, submission, and truth denied by history. Their motto was simple. No gods. Just her. Year 31, the children of reflection. They weren't born. They were awakened. Children all over the world, from Brazil to Morocco, India to Norway, began sketching the same image, a woman in red standing in front of a fogged mirror. Many had never heard the name Seraphina, yet they spoke it in their sleep. Governments formed joint investigative programs. But every child they isolated fell into a silent trance. The Red Veil called them the Reflectors. And they would be Seraphina's prophets. Year 32, the Echo Campaign. Whispers became policy. Across the globe, digital ads began to mirror Seraphina's image, faint, barely visible. Audio glitches in smart speakers began inserting the words kneel, devotion, and obedience mid-song. The Red Veil launched what they called the Echo Campaign, a slow, hypnotic infiltration of media and memory. Viewers began dreaming in red. Year 33, the House of Silk. In the French Pyrenees, a monastery was quietly repurposed by the inheritors. Inside, a house of silk. Not a brothel. A sanctuary of surrender. World leaders, tech moguls, and ex-priests came here for one purpose, to be unmade. They emerged changed. Lighter. Devoted. None of them ever publicly acknowledged the visit. But their policies afterward always aligned with Seraphina's gospel. Year 34, the Fractured Glass. For the first time in decades, a red veil mirror shattered in a public temple, unprovoked. A fissure formed not just in the glass, but in belief. Some inheritors believed the mirror cities were weakening her reach. That the legacy had become corrupted by comfort. These rebels called themselves the Broken Gaze. They began meeting in silence. Facing empty walls instead of mirrors. They whispered not her name, but Clea's, Year 35, the fall of the Vatican. It began with a shattered window in the papal library, and ended with smoke. The Vatican, having denounced the Red Veil for decades, collapsed in ritual fire. Red-robed women walked calmly through the blaze. No one stopped them. In place of crosses, mirrors were mounted. A message appeared across every cathedral screen in the world. You baptize them in guilt. We anoint them in truth. Year 35, the fall of the Vatican. It began with a shattered window in the papal library, and ended with smoke. The Vatican, having denounced the Red Veil for decades, collapsed in ritual fire. Red-robed women walked calmly through the blaze. No one stopped them. In place of crosses, mirrors were mounted. A message appeared across every cathedral screen in the world. You baptize them in guilt. We anoint them in truth. Year 36, the devoted census. The Red Veil initiated a worldwide project, not to count citizens, but to identify the devoted. Those whose dreams aligned with her. Whose reflections fogged before their breath touched glass. Whose hearts slowed when her name was whispered. These individuals were marked, not with ink, but with scent, a trace of rose, sandalwood, and smoke that never faded. The world was no longer divided by borders, but by breath. Year 37, the Mirror Cities. Cities built underground, completely covered in reflective glass. Controlled by inheritors. Anyone who entered and exited changed. Tourists came out whispering commands they didn't remember learning. Families forgot each other. Lovers woke up bonded by vows they never made. The Mirror Cities weren't prisons. They were schools. Year 38, the Blinding. Leaders of the Iron Circle attempted a broadcast, to expose what they claimed was mass hypnosis. As the cameras rolled, each speaker paused mid-sentence. They all stared off camera. Then, one by one, they gouged out their own eyes. The footage was never aired, but leaked. The Red Veil's response was simple. They chose blindness over vision. So we gave them what they wanted. Year 39, the Gathering Silence. In 40 cities, on the same night, power grids failed at the stroke of midnight. No sound. No light. Only candles. Only breath. When power returned, every screen, phone, TV, billboard, displayed one image, Elise, seated on a throne of mirrors, smiling. The next morning, 7 million people joined the Red Veil. Voluntarily. Year 40, the Crimson Divide. Half the world now lived under the Red Veil. The other half resisted. A new global conflict emerged. Not of weapons, but of reflection. Red Veil screens began replacing public education. Political parties broke apart. Military leaders defected after a single glance into a red-framed mirror. Resistance forces formed the Iron Circle, led by descendants of exiled clergy and ancient bloodlines. They held only one truth. She is not salvation. She is seduction. But even among them, some whispered her name at night. It was meant to expose the psychological warfare of the Red Veil, featuring former inheritors turned defectors. The feed cut out 66 seconds in. Every screen went black, then red, then mirrored. A voice said, "You wanted truth. You couldn't even face your reflection." Then silence. The resistance lost 80% of its funding overnight. Year 45, the return of Clea *********. Year 45, the return of Clea. She stepped out of the sea barefoot, clothed in white lace and silence. Clea was thought dead, but she returned carrying only one object, a shattered piece of the original mirror. She didn't speak for 3 days. Then she wrote one sentence. She was never the threat. We are. Her eyes no longer reflected light. Only shadow. Year 41, the ritual of smoke. In the skies above Istanbul, Beijing, and Los Angeles, smoke rose in perfect spirals from rooftops. Each cloud drifted in unison, spelling a single word visible by satellite, her. The ritual of smoke was never announced. It simply began. Followers of the Red Veil stood on balconies, dressed in crimson, lighting incense, and whispering verses from a text never published. Governments panicked. Airspace was locked. Drones flew in. But the smoke passed through steel. And inside every cloud, a face appeared. Year 42, the eye beneath the earth. Deep beneath the mirror city of Kaelstrom, a buried temple was discovered by rebellious excavators from the Iron Circle. At the center, a dome lined with polished obsidian, and in the ceiling, a pupil that opened. What looked like stone blinked. And those who looked up swore they saw Elise, floating in reverse, like she had always been beneath them, watching. The sight was sealed. The team disappeared. Year 43, the Song of Obedience. A single audio file went viral. No artist. No label. Just a haunting choral chant uploaded at 3:33 a.m. Listeners experienced elevated heart rates, vivid dreams, and a compulsion to confess long-buried secrets. People danced in their sleep. In mirror temples, the song became scripture. Spotify removed it. But it kept returning. Year 44, the last broadcast. The United Resistance attempted one final global transmission. It was meant to expose the psychological warfare of the Red Veil, featuring former inheritors turned defectors. The feed cut out 66 seconds in. Every screen went black, then red, then mirrored. A voice said, "You wanted truth. You couldn't even face your reflection." Then silence. The resistance lost 80% of its funding overnight. Year 45, the return of Clea ********** Year 45, the return of Clea. She stepped out of the sea barefoot, clothed in white lace and silence. Clea was thought dead, but she returned carrying only one object, a shattered piece of the original mirror. She didn't speak for 3 days. Then she wrote one sentence. She was never the threat. We are. Her eyes no longer reflected light. Only shadow.